Welcome to the Stellar Hour. Today is Monday, April 22nd, 2019. Tonight, I'd like to talk about narcissists. Following on the last podcast that I did called The Middlers, I have a client named Estelle who is really open to sharing her situation of what she experienced after being targeted by a narcissist at work. And one of the things that got me thinking about this is that there are so many colloquial terms used today to describe what narcissists are. And I think it can obfuscate us from really understanding who and what a narcissist is, and in particular, how dangerous they can be, especially when you get in their crosshairs. So, what I'd like to do is share my screen right now and just talk a little bit about what are narcissists. What are some of the things that we know about them? So, let's see. View, oh golly, slideshow. Beginning. Okay, here we go. I thought it was interesting as I was looking up what are narcissists. And what narcissistic personality disorder is. And I thought it is interesting about, they say it's rare, and that treatment can help, but this condition can't be cured. And then you look over here and age is affected. And if people are affected, then and they can't be cured, then what does this really mean? And the purpose for me putting this up there is to share how confusing information really is today about what certain medical conditions are. And so how we can really better understand what's going on when we're talking about certain terms. So narcissism isn't just necessarily someone who loves himself. It's not narcissists looking at themselves in the fountain and saying, oh, I look so beautiful. It's a much more pernicious condition than that. It's almost like not as dangerous as a psychopath, but close to it. I still sometimes could say that they could be like an interspecies. So my client, Estelle, had been working in an organization. She came in to fill in for somebody that was out on a leave. And she's extremely competent. And there's another woman that she worked with who had taken on a different role in the organization. And Estelle started taking over some of her responsibilities. For the first 2 months that Estelle was in the organization, this other woman, Diana, was not at work. She was on a personal leave. And Diana really, Diana, see, here I go. Estelle really enjoyed working in the organization for the first couple of months. She took on the challenges, she enjoyed the relationships. But when Diana came back to work, things started changing. And what changed was Diana had a relationship with their boss, and a very long-term relationship over 10 years. And it turns out that Diana and the boss, Rachel, had worked together in another organization before. So this is a really enduring pattern. And the reason I bring this up and why it's important is that when people like that have long-term relationships, there's like a glue that holds them together. And so they almost become, their patterns become invisible because they're enmeshed with each other. And so their own types of dysfunctions will mirror or fit like a key into a lock, without anybody even noticing that there's a problem with it. So what I'd like to do is like just go through quickly and talk about, like, of course, what it means to be a narcissist. And the first point here, it lacks empathy. So the narcissist lacks empathy. It lacks empathy, and that's a really important point because empathy is another term that's really being the meaning of the word is really changing. So empathy is almost like anything goes today, being politically correct. But empathy really brings in forth care and compassion. And so a person who's a narcissist doesn't really care about other people. They care about themselves. And something that I'll get into later is what I have seen in coaching others is that when clients have low access to shame, meaning they're basically shameless, it's going to affect their sense of morality and how they perceive themselves and how they perceive others. So where on this point here, it says, they lie and manipulate to get what he or she wants. They don't perceive what they're doing as lying, and they perceive that whatever they do to you, you deserve. You'll find that they have a lot of negative affect. They can be very critical, yet they're highly sensitive to any perceived slight, anything that would feel humiliating to them. Because the thing that's most important for them is to deny their own feeling. It's they misplace their shame. So their shame is located outside of themselves. They don't access it. So you'll see this is another reason why they will never really apologize. They can't. They don't mean it. They might do it and they can imitate. And that's another really dangerous thing that you'll see with narcissists is that they're good at imitating. They know what society expects, even though they don't feel it. If they feel like you've got something they want, that will make them feel less than, and that's going to make you a target. And that's exactly what happened to Estelle. So, Estelle, not recognizing the signs, was sharing accomplishments that she had made within the organization. What she wasn't aware of is how devious and manipulative Diana was in seeking to basically destroy her. Um, Diana started contacting members of Estelle's team and stirring the pot. She also used her long term relationship with Rachel against Estelle without Estelle being aware of what was going on. She knew there were issues with Diana, but she did not comprehend just how vicious Diana would be in trying to destroy her. Something that people think is that narcissists will go after weak people. The narcissist likes the strong person because it makes them feel so much more superior when they can destroy them. So, in this case with Diana and Estelle, Diana was highly intimidated by Estelle's competency and believe it or not, emotional intelligence. So, I hope I have something in here in my slide about that. It it seems to be contradictory and paradoxical, and I think this is something to really pay attention to as people awaken. Life is paradoxical. Things that don't seemingly make sense do make sense. And it seems paradoxical that a person who has high emotional intelligence and is competent could get caught up and get triggered and get basically brought down by a narcissist. But it happens. Um, so narcissists act in different ways, but one of the things I think is really important to recognize this is about the shame game. So when I was coaching, I used a special emotional intelligence assessment, and it showed like what types of feelings people access and what their attachment strategies were. And there were certain profiles that I would see of people who had low access to shame, but higher access to anger. They had more of an avoidant dismissive attachment style, and I'll get into what that means. And I'm actually going to do another show around just dedicating it to the basics of what attachment theory is and what it means and what it means for you. Um, a person that doesn't access shame, again, will be shameless. They'll lack humility. They won't see what they're doing, but they'll project onto others what they will not accept for themselves. So it's really important for them to control other people, to be manipulative. Um, what you often see is they create doubt in the other person. It goes into this whole thing of gaslighting. The other person's like, God, did that really happen? It got to a point with Estelle that she deteriorated within a couple of months after Diana coming back to work. Diana really ratcheted up her attacks on Estelle probably in February. And I remember one day we had a session in person, and I was looking at her and I looked at her legs and I said, what happened here? And her legs just like had these big red marks all over them. And I noticed the same thing in her arms. Well, she'd broken out with eczema. She was so stressed out over what was happening at work. It really began to physically manifest in her. I mean, her hair started getting thinner. She gained weight. She was stressed all of the time. She started drinking more and ways of coping because she knew she was a very competent person. And yet, no matter what she did, she kept getting tripped up by Diana. It was like she couldn't do anything right. And then she started to become hyper vigilant. she started to think about, like, when is the next attack going to come? And she made a really great analogy. She said, Kathy, it's almost like I got dropped in a minefield. I have no idea where any of the mines are. And they keep going off. There's nothing predictable about it. So that's another thing about the threat that a narcissist can cause in another person, because another person doesn't think, a regular human being doesn't think the way that a narcissist thinks. And so the person over time who gets targeted by a Diana starts to feel doubt. Their confidence begins to erode. They start anticipating, when and where is the next attack going to come from? Who is Diana creating alliances with that Estelle wasn't even aware of? And so when we had sessions, I would talk about that, and she would come in and say, I can't believe how I got sabotaged again, or got put into a double bind. And a double bind is something really important to understand. Narcissists are brilliant at using double binds. A double bind is that there's no way you can win in a situation. So they set you up that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And they have the power to make you look bad. They have a certain sixth sense about where your weaknesses are. And a weakness to them could be your care and your passion. I think it was in March. Estelle and I had a meeting, and she's like, "Yeah, Diana sent me an email this week, telling me how much she enjoyed working with me and how glad she was that I was on the team, and how much passion I have." And I said, "Oh, you got a love bomb." A love bomb is a way that a narcissist tries to control the other person and knock them off center. So the person who gets the recipient, like Estelle, who got that email, is like, "Wow, maybe it's not as bad as I think. That this person's really not doing what they're doing to me." It's a setup. When you get a love bomb like Estelle did, I said, just beware, because she's likely going to be ratcheting it up on you. And that's exactly what happened. It got to be so stressful. Um, Diana, having had so much experience in this company, like for over a decade, and having the relationship with Rachel, their boss, it was such a bad situation that Estelle really didn't have any allies on the team, because the team itself had been intact for a long time, not just Diana and Rachel, but other people on the team also. And they'd worked together before. And this is something that I think people should really be aware of, that when um, people have been working together for a long time and they've come from other jobs together, it can be a really positive thing. Don't get me wrong. But it also can be a very dysfunctional thing, because their dysfunctions fit one another. And so it's something to really to be aware of. And I think this was like such a devastating experience. I don't think it was. I know it was a devastating experience for Estelle, because it didn't feel like she could ever win. And she said to me at one point, "You know what, Kathy? It feels like my competence is making me incompetent. And if I had not done anything, and I just like basically come into work and checked in and not held my team accountable, I think I'd still be doing okay." And I thought, I don't know. This was really such a um, vicious attack by Diana. There was just something about Estelle's presence that made Diana nuts, and she had to feel superior by doing everything she could to crush Estelle. Um, so some other notes. One of the things that Estelle and I talked about recently, as she's going to be leaving the organization, she got to a point where she said she can't cope anymore, let alone be functional. She said she'd rather just leave and look for a new job, because the toll it has been taking on her has been so profound. Um, People really underestimate that when you're working with a narcissist and you're working with somebody who is so cunning and who really lacks any morality, who will lie at the drop of a hat. Estelle said to me, I was told by my boss I was not executing on this certain project. And she said, "How could I even have known how to do it? There's nothing documented on it." She's like, I constantly feel like I'm getting caught in a catch 22. And my thought to her was, and what I expressed to her is, my hunch is that Diana is probably telling Rachel that she's telling you what to do, but you're still not executing on it. So there's really nothing you can do. And compounding this is that Estelle didn't meet very regularly with her boss. And so it was the bosses so clearly aligned with Diana and thought Diana was so wonderful. But Rachel had her blinders on because Rachel was completely unaware of how Diana would speak about her and how disparaging Diana was about Rachel, which made it that much more difficult for Estelle because she thought, how could she say anything to her boss, Rachel, when Rachel adored Diana, and none of them could see it and nobody would talk about it? There come times where, when you're in such a situation, there are not a lot of choices. And, I think this is a very difficult thing. Who wants to think that their choices are so limited? The choice could be that she continued to stay and maybe titrate down what she was doing and hope that maybe something else would come up and Diana would find another target. Um, but that really wasn't very likely given everything that was happening. So Estelle and I spoke about what were some of the learnings? What were some of the things that you've taken away from this? And she said, do not underestimate their cunning. She's like, I truly believe, meaning Estelle said, I truly believe that my competence in what I had done was going to shine. And she's like, and it didn't. She said, I completely underestimated it. And she said she would have listened more intently and observed and recognized that she should not have talked about her accomplishments. She should have distanced. I'm going to give some tips about what she could have done. We talked about how she could have communicated and documented more. So I hate to say it, but doing a CYA with her boss could have been more helpful for her. One of the things that did help was learning to not take it personally, learning to recognize that what Diana was doing, she really was doing. Estelle was not screwing things up. Um, what happened is, this last point, don't move too fast. The energy of the environment that Diana created with her made Estelle want to take action quickly. And I said, you can't do that. You have to take more time. Don't move too fast and react because you're going to make a misstep. And that did happen a couple of times. And Estelle found that when she did take more time and was more thoughtful, she could then make a choice. And sometimes the choice really was to do nothing, because the bottom line is, she couldn't go to Rachel and tell Rachel what was going on because Rachel was not receptive to it. And it seems like, how can that be? Estelle wasn't doing anything wrong. Here's the funny thing. She wasn't doing anything wrong, and she really wanted to be successful. I mean, that's what's so fascinating about this. Here you have somebody that really cared, passionate. That was one thing that Diana did pick up on, that was true. Um, and really wanted to make a difference. And yet at every turn, Diana clipped her. It was as if though any type of success that Estelle had, Diana had to destroy. So some of the tips that we talked about, and hopefully Estelle won't run into another Diana again, is don't overshare about your life at work. It only draws the narcissist's attention. Try to get them to talk about themselves, which is something that she did. And she would notice as she spoke with Diana and she would shift the topic, how Diana would talk and talk and talk about herself, and not even ask Estelle a question. And it didn't matter. And that was another thing that was interesting. It almost didn't matter what Estelle would do. In fact, at one point, I have on another slide, um, tried to limit contact with them. And when Estelle tried that, it made it even worse. That's actually what triggered the love bomb. Estelle had been distancing herself from Diana, trying to limit her interaction with her. And that made Diana nervous. And that's when that love bomb came. And so, avoiding them as much as you possibly can, that's a tricky one. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Another thing that Estelle and I spoke about is to be more vague in your responses. Don't let Diana know what you really care about. And unfortunately, Diana already had a sense for that. And so anything that Estelle really cared about, Diana went after. Um, Diana was super successful in the use of double binds and triangles. And I'm going to get into that. Triangles happen when um, three people are brought into a situation that involves two people. Um, there's something called the drama triangle. This came out of the work of Eric Byrne and games people play. And what tends to happen is that there's a victim, a persecutor who's going to rescue. There's a persecutor and then a rescuer. Um, Dynamics play out. So, for example, a victim. So, Diana can go to Rachel, Diana as a victim, and say, Kathy hasn't gotten me that report yet, Rachel. I know that, could you just talk to her in your next one on one? So Rachel talks to Estelle and says, Hey, Estelle, you haven't gotten that report for Diana yet. And Diana's like, Estelle is thinking to herself, wow, Diana didn't even ask me for that report. So you get these triangles that are created. I see this happen a lot in organizations. Um, you know, Rescuers are always drawn in, but they can become persecutors. So, one of the things that's really fascinating about how drama triangles work is roles are always switching. So, when I used to facilitate this in workshops, I use this example all the time, the one I just gave, saying, Hey, Estelle didn't get me this report. Can you please help me? You've got a better relationship with her than I do. So then Rachel goes back to Estelle, and now Rachel becomes the persecutor. She's the rescuer to Diana, but now she's the persecutor to Estelle. Hey, why haven't you gotten that report for Diana yet? And now Estelle is feeling like a victim, thinking, "Ah, she never even told me that she needed that report." And so then Estelle is upset with Diana, but she knows better because we had discussions around this. Don't approach her. You're not going to be able to win. Because when you're dealing with a true narcissist, you can't win. See, the game is that nobody wins. Well, Diana wins, but nobody else wins. And so the drama triangle is very, very effective. It helps people to feel like helpless. Oh, there's nothing I can do. Um, it creates an orientation of a problem. So, what tends to happen in organizations where you see the drama triangle at work is that there tends to be a problem focus, and problems create anxiety. And when we feel anxious, we react to it, which exacerbates the problem. What you see is people who want to try harder, and so what happens is they get into what we call vicious circles or vicious cycles. They can't get out of it. And people aren't aware of where their attention is or what they think they have good intentions, but they don't realize where their attention is going and what the results are. So what we often talk about when you get caught in these drama triangles is to focus on, well, what's the outcome that you're seeking? What's a small step that you can take? What's your vision and outcome? And what tends to happen is that when you're dealing with narcissists, this doesn't always really work very well. Estelle's vision was that she could come in and make a difference and do something really positive. And the fact that she'd already had success doing that in the couple of months that Diana was out was going to carry her through. But that didn't really happen. So we talked about little steps she could take, but this is the challenging thing about working with a narcissist. When you're working with a Diana who has a relationship with the boss that's long term and has other relationships within the organization, and we're sabotaging Estelle like from every direction. Um, Sometimes you have to just say, cut bait and move on. Sometimes you can go to HR and seek their help, but in this case, that absolutely was not a possibility. So, these things become really important to be aware of. I'm going to stop sharing now. I think about a couple notes that I've taken here. Um, it takes so much energy for a person who's in a situation like Estelle was to find the motivation to go to work. She said, Kathy, it's not the work that's hard. She's like, I love the work and I love working hard. What's hard is navigating the relationships. What's hard is trying to figure out where am I going to be sabotaged next? Like, where's the like the minefield? Where's the next mine? I can like walk partway through the field and I'm like, oh, sense of relief. And then boom, a mine comes out. It's like, wow. She's like, I couldn't even have foreseen that coming. And that was another thing that was really fascinating is that Estelle couldn't even anticipate where the next bomb or mine was going to come from, and we that's a really important thing. Human beings need to be able to understand what they can anticipate and what they can expect. Have some sort of control over their lives. To feel like they have a sense and some competency and confidence. And that can get eroded very quickly when you're working with a narcissist, especially when they're very clever within the system that they work within. So and I think again, it's really important to focus on um, understanding that the narcissist doesn't target weak people. They get attracted to a person's strengths, and those strengths are what they go after, and those strengths can become, unfortunately, for a person like Estelle, their weakness. So Estelle became a target not because she was weak, but because she was getting bullied by Diana. And I think this is a really hard thing to deal with today. How do you deal with a bully when you don't have the support of HR, when you don't have the support of other people on your team? What are your options? Where do you go and what can you do? Um, the other thing that was fascinating about this is that there were middlers on Estelle's team. In fact, some of the middlers were her direct reports. And what happened is Diana started to, okay, triangle again, right? So um, Diana, the middlers who were the victims, would then reach out to Diana, rescuer, and Estelle was the persecutor, like, oh, Estelle is giving us too much work to do. And then Diana would come in like, oh, poor you. I'll talk to Rachel about it and we'll get this taken care of. And so it was like there were so many different directions that were coming at Estelle that, you know, there there wasn't really any deposits left in the bank to withdraw from. In fact, she was well overdrawn by the time she left the organization at the end of March. She said it wasn't worth the toll it was taking on her health and her relationships and the sense of incompetence. She's like, I can't even think about looking for a new job now. She's like, I just feel like so drained. I'm so full of doubt right now because whole experience made her feel out about her own self. Where she had at one time been very competent, she was feeling very full of doubt, and it was just it's a fascinating thing how this can happen. The whole thing of gaslighting and manipulation, and the feeling of helplessness. She's working from work to desk, and I was at work at the time too, still seeing clients on weekends and after hours. And she called me. She's like, I can't take it anymore. I'm just gonna have a meltdown. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, it's this whole feeling of helplessness that I know that I am good at what I do and that I want to do a good job. And at every turn, I feel like I'm getting clipped. I feel like there's nothing I can do to win. And I said, well, where do you want to go? Where's your energy around this? Sometimes we feel like, we have certain adages people will hear. And this is one she brought up to me. Well, Kathy, you have to have a job to get a job. And I said, well, Estelle, if your legs are all covered with sores as they are, you're not sleeping, you're completely stressed out. How is it that you think you're going to show up for an interview? How is it that you think your energy is going to be? And are you going to really have the energy to start a new job? Your health, your emotional health is extremely important. And I don't know that, I didn't say this to her, but I don't know how she could have done it because the pressure was so intense. There's no break. It was every day. She kept saying, "I hope that Diana goes on vacation," and I'm like, "Do you see anything on her calendar?" And she's like, "No." And she's like, "Maybe I could make it through a little bit longer." I'm like, "Oh, maybe she'll go back out on leave," but that wasn't going to happen. And so, we tried different steps working together about what she could do, and it really didn't seem to work. And so there are times that this whole thing about trying at all costs or winning, and it's not right, it's not fair. You're absolutely right. That oh, not you, I, my pronouns again. um, it absolutely was not fair, and that's really true. And people like Diana are only successful because they find themselves in organizations where they can manipulate. Diana was also like a queen bee. In the organization, there's no room for anybody else but for her. And it didn't matter that what she was doing wasn't the best thing for the organization. And that's another thing that's really fascinating. It didn't matter that what Estelle was doing was better for the organization than what Diana did. But it didn't matter. And so it goes back to say, what are you going to do? Now, thankfully, this doesn't happen that often. You're going to deal more with middlers, people who aren't really so competent or emotionally immature. And this is something that you'll see. Narcissists can succeed in organizations where there's a lack of emotional maturity. And we see this a lot in society today. And we see it characterized by emotional regression, people who can't manage their own emotions. And this is another way that you see triangles come in. Triangles come in when two people can't deal with their own emotion, and so they bring a third person in, or they'll go to HR. In some way, the person who can't deal with their own emotion is going to bring in another person, like bringing in mommy or daddy. These patterns from childhood don't just go away because people's bodies get big and they're supposedly adults. There are a lot of adults who are emotionally immature. And you see this a lot in our society today, and it's encouraged. And I think another reason that people get away with it so much is that we live in the society of being politically correct and good people, and that to speak the truth about what's happening makes a person politically incorrect. And so it really it can be a very big catch-22 situation, in that person who is emotionally intelligent and is competent will often capitulate to these emotionally immature people, these middlers, who really don't want to learn and grow, who are content just to come to work and to be mediocre, to just get by. And the other thing is, of course, they're not going to see that they're mediocre. They're not going to see that they're middlers. They're going to think that they're high performers, because they're going to suffer from Dunning-Kruger effect. And I'm going to get into these things a little bit more. I just kind of wanted to get this video out today. The Dunning-Kruger effect is something really fascinating, and there was a great study done on it with emotional intelligence. And what the Dunning-Kruger effect says is that the very skills you need to be competent at what you're doing are the very same skills that you need to evaluate your competence. So, for example, people who have low emotional intelligence will often report that they have high emotional intelligence because they lack the emotional intelligence skills to assess that they're not emotionally intelligent. So the skill that you need to assess your competence is the very skill that you lack. And we see this a lot. So people don't know what they don't know, and they don't want to know what they don't know. They want to believe that they're right, because believing they're right means they don't have to change. And what you'll see with people like this is that change for them means that the other person has to change. So for the middler to be okay, the other person has to change. And then in the case of the narcissist, well, their target has to be obliterated. I mean, that really is the goal of the narcissist. And if you can't get their attention directed elsewhere, if you don't have a source where you can get help, another supervisor or leader or HR, you have to evaluate what your options are, because it's probably not going to get better for you. So I just wanted to go through this today. I'm going to get in more detail about it. I'm going to break down more about what attachment theory is, how it works with drama triangles, communication, how to take care of ourselves when we're living in such crazy times as we are right now. It's really amazing to me, especially as I've gone back to work too, and I've had these discussions when I talk to you guys about the middlers, how much our society has changed in a very short period of time. So I'm going to sign off for today. If you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. If there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, please let me know. Good night.